The dust devil swirled across the New Mexico territory like a ghost searching for its grave, and Jackson Cordell watched it from beneath the brim of his weathered hat with the kind of attention a man gives to omens. He had ridden 3 days straight from the railhead in Santa Fe, following a message that made no earthly sense but carried the unmistakable weight of desperate truth. The paper still crinkled in his vest pocket, worn soft from repeated readings during lonely nights on the trail. Come to the Standing Rock. A life depends on your answer. Chief Nanton sends word. That was all. No explanation. No reason why a Chiricahua chief would summon a cowboy he'd met exactly once 5 years back during a tense parley over water rights that nearly ended in bloodshed. Jackson had been nothing more than a ranch hand then, barely 20 years old, sent by his employer to translate because he'd grown up playing with Apache children before the war scattered everyone to the four winds. He remembered Chief Nanton as a man of iron will and careful words, someone who valued honor above all things and never forgot a face or a favor. During that parley, Jackson had quietly corrected his employer's interpreter, who was deliberately mistranslating to provoke a fight. The correction had saved lives on both sides. Nanton had looked at him with those dark, measuring eyes and given a single nod of acknowledgment. Nothing more had passed between them until this cryptic summons arrived, delivered by a Mexican courier who refused to answer questions and disappeared into the desert like smoke. The Standing Rock settlement sat in a valley where 3 territories met, a place where the law was whatever men made of it and survival depended on strength, cunning, or the kind of luck that ran out when you needed it most. Jackson rode in at sunset, when the buildings cast long shadows that made everything look twice its size and twice as menacing. The town consisted of maybe 24 structures, half of them empty, the rest occupied by folks who had nowhere else to go or nothing left to lose. At the far end of the single street, beyond the failed general store and the cantina that never seemed to close, stood a large adobe building that had once been a Spanish mission. That was where the message said to come. Jackson dismounted in front of the mission, his legs stiff from days in the saddle, his hand instinctively checking the Colt revolver at his hip. Not that he expected trouble from Nanton, but a man didn't survive long in this country without maintaining certain habits. The heavy wooden door stood open, and from inside came the smell of sage smoke and something else, something medicinal and bitter that he couldn't identify. He stepped into the dim interior and let his eyes adjust to the shadows. Chief Nanton sat on a low bench against the far wall, his weathered face impassive, his gray-streaked hair bound back with a strip of red cloth. He wore a mix of traditional and white man's clothing, a compromise that spoke to the brutal realities of the changing world. 2 younger Apache men stood behind him, warriors by the look of them, their faces hard and watchful. But it was the figure to Nanton's right that made Jackson's breath catch in his throat. A woman sat there, wrapped in a blanket despite the warmth of the evening, her face pale as fresh milk and drawn with pain or illness or both. Her hair, the color of wild honey, hung loose around her shoulders, and her eyes, when they met his, were the startling blue of a mountain lake. She was white, clearly not Apache, and clearly unwell. Her hands, clutching the blanket closed at her throat, trembled with a fine, constant shake. "Jackson Cordell," Nanton said, his English precise and formal. "You came. This is good. You are a man who keeps his word." "I came because your message said a life depended on it," Jackson replied carefully. "I'm here to listen." Nanton gestured toward the woman. "This is Catherine Brennan. 3 months ago, her father's stagecoach was attacked by bandits in the canyon country. Everyone was killed. Catherine survived only because she hid beneath the bodies of the dead. My warriors found her 2 days later, half mad with thirst and terror. We brought her here. We saved her life." Jackson nodded slowly, trying to understand where this was leading. "That was a kindness, Chief, a mercy." "It was duty," Nanton corrected. "But there is more you must know. Catherine's father was Cornelius Brennan, the railroad man. very rich, very powerful. Before he died, he had made enemies, business enemies who wanted his railroad charter and his land grants. These enemies, they learned Catherine survived. They send men to find her, to kill her, because she is the only heir. If she dies, Brennan's holdings go to his business partner, a man named Sutton, who arranged the attack. The pieces were starting to come together, but Jackson still couldn't see his place in this deadly puzzle. Why not take her to the army, to the territorial authorities? One of the young warriors behind Nanton made a sound of disgust, and the chief's face remained impassive as stone. The army? They would take her, yes, and before sundown she would be dead in an accident that no one could prove was murder. Sutton has many friends, much money. The authorities in Santa Fe, in Albuquerque, they are in his pocket. Catherine has nowhere to go, no one to protect her. And you can't keep her safe here forever, Jackson said, understanding dawning. Sutton's men are already asking questions in every town, every settlement. They will come here eventually. When they do, they will bring many guns. Nanton leaned forward, his eyes boring into Jackson's. There is only one way to protect her, one way that Sutton cannot break. Catherine must marry. In the white man's law, a husband controls his wife's property. If she has a husband, a strong husband who cannot be bought or frightened, Sutton cannot touch what was her father's, and if he cannot touch the property, there is no reason to kill her. Jackson felt his mouth go dry. Chief, I'm just a cowboy. I've got $40 and a horse to my name. I'm nobody. You are a man of honor, Nanton said flatly. I have seen this. Catherine needs honor, not money. She needs someone who will stand when others run. Someone who cannot be corrupted. Catherine spoke for the first time, her voice soft and ragged, like she hadn't used it much in recent weeks. I'm dying anyway, Mr. Cordell. The fever I caught while hiding in that canyon, it comes and goes. The Apache medicine woman says I have perhaps 3 months, maybe 6. But in that time, if I'm married to a good man, I can make arrangements. I can ensure my father's legacy doesn't fall into the hands of his murderer. I can set things right. Jackson stared at her, this fragile woman wrapped in blankets, offering him a dying heiress's hand and a target on his back. And if I refuse? Nanton stood, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Then you walk out that door, and tomorrow Catherine dies. I cannot protect her much longer. My people, we are already on the edge of war with the settlers. To fight for a white woman would bring the army down on us, would destroy my people. I have done what I can. Now I ask you to do what I cannot. The chief walked to a table near the wall and lifted a cloth that covered something beneath. Jackson's feet carried him forward without conscious thought, and when he looked down at what lay revealed, he stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to breathe. On the table were 2 objects, a marriage contract, written in careful legal script, and beside it, a Colt revolver with the hammer cocked. Wed my doomed heiress, Nanton said quietly, or face death. Those are your choices, Jackson Cordell. Choose now. The night air outside the mission felt thick enough to choke on, and Jackson stood in the doorway, staring up at stars that offered no guidance, no answers to impossible questions. Behind him, he could hear the soft murmur of voices as Nanton spoke to Catherine in low tones, giving the cowboy time to wrestle with a decision that would change everything. Marriage. Death. Those were his options, laid out as clearly as a poker hand, and Jackson had never been much good at poker. He thought about the gun on that table, the threat implicit and undeniable. Nanton was not a man who made empty gestures. If Jackson walked away, the chief would consider it a betrayal of the debt between them, a violation of the honor that held their world together when law and civilization failed. And Nanton was right about one thing: Catherine Brennan would die. Probably slowly, probably badly, at the hands of men who killed for money and thought nothing of it. Jackson had seen too much death in his 25 years. The war between the states had taken his father and two older brothers. The Apache Wars had taken childhood friends on both sides. The simple brutality of frontier life had taken his mother, dead of pneumonia in a drafty cabin while he was away working a trail drive. He'd become a cowboy not out of romance but out of necessity, drifting from ranch to ranch, never settling, never forming attachments that could be torn away. And now this stranger with honey-colored hair and fever-bright eyes was asking him to attach himself to her, knowing she was already marked for death by illness if not by bullets. "It's madness," he muttered to the uncaring stars. "Most brave things are," a voice said from behind him. Jackson turned to find Catherine standing in the doorway, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders but her posture straighter than before, as if the simple act of speaking her situation aloud had given her some strength back. Up close, even in the dim light spilling from the mission, he could see the remnants of beauty in her face, the kind of delicate features that belonged in a San Francisco drawing room, not a desperate hideout in Apache country. "Miss Brennan, you should rest," he said awkwardly. "I've been resting for 3 months, Mr. Cordell, resting and hiding and waiting for something to change. Chief Nanton has been more than generous, more than kind, but I can see what this is costing his people. The settlers already distrust them. If they knew he was sheltering me, harboring Cornelius Brennan's daughter, it would be the excuse some of them need to start shooting." She moved closer, and he could smell sage and mesquite smoke in her hair. "I won't be responsible for more death. I've seen enough of it." Jackson studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or deception, but found only exhaustion and a peculiar kind of determination that he recognized. It was the look of someone who had already lost everything and therefore had nothing left to fear. "Your father was a rich man. Surely there's someone else, someone more suitable, who could help you." Catherine's laugh was bitter and short. "My father's friends were business associates, Mr. Cordell, not companions. When there was profit to be made, they smiled and shook his hand. Now that he's dead and I'm inconvenient, they've all remembered pressing engagements elsewhere. My mother's family back in Boston disowned her when she married a railroad man and moved west. I have no siblings, no cousins who've acknowledged me. I am, in every way that matters, alone in the world except for the people trying to kill me and the Apache who saved me out of simple human decency." She paused, and when she continued, her voice was softer. "Chief Nanton says you grew up with his people, that you speak the language, that you understand honor in a way most white men don't. He says when you corrected that translator 5 years ago, you risked your own life to prevent bloodshed. That takes a special kind of courage." "That was just doing what was right," Jackson protested. "Exactly," Catherine said. "And that's all I'm asking for now. Not love, not pretense. Just someone who'll do what's right long enough for me to set my affairs in order and die in peace." Knowing Sutton didn't win, the bluntness of it hit Jackson like a physical blow. She spoke of her own death so casually, as if discussing the weather or the price of cattle. "The medicine woman, she's certain about the fever?" "She's certain that it's damaged my heart. I can feel it myself, the way it races sometimes for no reason, the way I get dizzy standing up too quickly. I might have a year if I'm lucky, Mr. Cordell, more likely 6 months. But in that time, as your wife, I could sign documents that would transfer my father's railroad charter to a trust, to be used for building schools and hospitals in the territories. I could ensure the land grants go toward settlements for families instead of speculation. I could make my father's work mean something beyond just making rich men richer." Jackson turned back to the stars, weighing the variables. 6 months, maybe a year. In that time, he'd make enemies of powerful men, men with resources he couldn't imagine. Sutton would come for him. There was no question about that. But Nanton was right about the law. A husband controlled his wife's property, and if Catherine died while married to him, those holdings would pass to him first, not revert to business partners. It would buy time, at least. Time to expose Sutton's crimes, time to ensure justice was done. And if he refused? Catherine would die, probably within weeks. Nanton would be forced to turn her out or face war with the settlers. The woman who'd survived a massacre by hiding under corpses, who'd endured 3 months of exile and illness, would end her days in terror and pain. The thought sat in his gut like bad whiskey. "If I do this," Jackson said slowly, "if I marry you, I need to know everything. Every detail of your father's business, every enemy he made, every asset he controlled. I need names, dates, documents. I'll need to know who I can trust and who I can't." Catherine's breath caught. "Then you'll do it?" "I'll do it because Chief Nanton asked, and I owe him a debt. I'll do it because you deserve better than what Sutton has planned. But I won't do it as a fiction, Miss Brennan. If we're married, I'll protect you as a husband should, and I'll honor the commitment until death parts us, whether that's 6 months or 60 years from now. That's the only way I know how to do things." Tears caught the starlight on Catherine's cheeks. "Mr. Cordell, I don't know what to say. Say you'll tell me everything, and we'll figure this out together." They went back inside, where Nanton waited with the patience of stone. The chief's eyes moved between them, reading the decision before Jackson spoke it aloud. "I'll marry her," Jackson said. "I'll stand as her husband and protect her rights. But I need your help, Chief. I need to know everything about Cornelius Brennan's death, about Sutton's organization, about where Catherine's assets are and how to secure them." Nanton's stern face softened almost imperceptibly. "You choose honor. This is good. I will help. My warriors have been watching, listening. We know much about Sutton and his men." He gestured to the table where the contract and guns still waited. "There is a priest in the next settlement, a good man who will ask no questions if I vouch for you. We ride tomorrow at dawn. You marry in the eyes of God and the law, and then the real work begins." Jackson picked up the contract and read it carefully. The language was straightforward. A marriage agreement between Catherine Ann Brennan and Jackson Thomas Cordell, with provisions for the management of the Brennan estate and specific clauses preventing any transfer of assets to third parties without both signatures. It was dated and witnessed, waiting only for the signatures and a priest's blessing. "One more thing," Catherine said quietly. She reached into the folds of her blanket and withdrew a small leather journal, worn and stained. "This was my father's private diary. He kept records of everything, every meeting, every suspicious transaction. I managed to grab it before hiding in the stagecoach. It's evidence, Mr. Cordell. Evidence that could hang Sutton and his partners if it reaches the right authorities." Jackson took the journal, feeling the weight of it, the significance. This was what Sutton was really after, not just Catherine's inheritance, but the proof of his crimes. "You've been carrying this for 3 months? If Sutton's men had found you, they would have found it too," Catherine finished. "That's why I couldn't go to the army or the territorial authorities. I didn't know who my father trusted, who might be compromised. Chief Nanton was the only person I could think of who existed outside that corrupt system, someone my father had spoken of with respect." Nanton inclined his head. "Cornelius Brennan was a hard man, but he kept his word. When the railroad needed to cross Apache land, he negotiated honestly, paid fairly. Not like others who came with promises and left with our water, our hunting grounds. I remember him. The pieces were falling into place now, the full scope of what Jackson was stepping into becoming clear. This wasn't just about protecting a dying woman. It was about bringing down a criminal conspiracy, about ensuring justice in a land where justice often died before reaching the courthouse. It was about making a stand for something that mattered, even if the cost was everything. Jackson looked at Catherine, really looked at her, and saw past the illness and exhaustion to the strength underneath. She was her father's daughter, tough as rawhide beneath the delicate exterior. And she was trusting him, this stranger, with her life and her legacy. "We'll need to be smart about this," Jackson said, his mind already working through the challenges. Once we're married, Sutton will know within a week. He'll come for us with everything he has. We need to be ready. I can gather warriors, Nanton offered. Men who owe me debts, men who hate Sutton for his treatment of our people. No, Jackson said firmly. With respect, Chief, if Apache warriors get involved in protecting a white woman against white businessmen, it'll turn into a bloodbath that ends with your people on reservations or worse. We need to be smarter. We need to use the law, use publicity, use everything Sutton thinks he controls against him. Catherine's eyes brightened despite her pallor. The newspapers. My father had friends among the editors in Denver and San Francisco, men who owed him favors. If we could get evidence to them, create a public outcry, then Sutton can't kill you quietly, Jackson finished. He'd have to answer questions, face scrutiny. It might not be enough to convict him, but it could be enough to protect you. They talked deep into the night, planning and strategizing, and with each passing hour, Jackson felt the weight of his decisions settling onto his shoulders like a heavy coat. He was marrying a woman he'd just met, a woman marked for death by illness and assassins alike. He was making enemies of men who could destroy him with a word. He was stepping into a world of wealth and power and corruption that he'd spent his whole life avoiding. But he was also doing something that mattered, something that would mean his life counted for more than just drifting from ranch to ranch, existing without purpose. And as the first light of dawn began to creep through the mission windows, Jackson signed the marriage contract with a steady hand, committing himself to a path from which there was no turning back. Catherine signed below his name, her handwriting elegant despite her trembling fingers. Nanton witnessed the document, pressing his thumbprint beside his carefully written name. It wasn't a legal marriage yet, not until a priest blessed it, but it was a promise, and promises were the currency of honor. We ride in 1 hour, Nanton announced. Jackson, you will need better weapons. Catherine, you will need to be strong for the journey. Rest now, both of you. Tomorrow, everything changes. The ride to San Miguel took 6 hours through country so rough it made Jackson's teeth ache, and he could only imagine what it was doing to Catherine's damaged heart. She sat in front of him on his horse, wrapped in blankets and supported by his arms, and despite her obvious discomfort, she never complained. Nanton and his 2 warriors rode ahead and behind, watching the horizons with the constant vigilance of men who knew that danger could appear from any direction at any moment. The sun climbed and burned, turning the landscape into a furnace, but they pressed on, driven by urgency and the knowledge that every hour of delay gave Sutton's men more time to close in. San Miguel was barely larger than Standing Rock, just another collection of buildings clinging to existence in the harsh territory. But it had something the other settlement lacked. Father Domingo, a Spanish priest who'd been ministering to the scattered communities for 30 years and had seen enough of life's complications to know when not to ask questions. He stood in the doorway of his small church, a stocky man with kind eyes and sun-weathered skin, and greeted Nanton with the easy familiarity of old acquaintances. "My friend," Father Domingo said in Spanish, then switched to English when he saw Jackson and Catherine. "You bring me a wedding, I think. I can see it in how the young man holds the young woman, like she is precious glass that might shatter. We need to be married today." "Father," Catherine said, her voice hoarse from the dry air and the journey. Immediately, if possible. The priest studied her with eyes that had witnessed countless human dramas. "You are ill, child. Perhaps you should rest first. Gather your strength." "I'll rest after," Catherine insisted. "Please, Father." "Time is something I have very little of." Something in her voice, or perhaps in the grim set of Nanton's face, convinced the priest to ask no more questions. He ushered them into the church, a simple building with whitewashed walls and a handful of wooden pews. The altar was dressed in clean linen, and wildflowers someone had gathered stood in clay pots on either side of a wooden cross. It was humble, nothing like the grand cathedral Catherine's father probably would have chosen for his daughter's wedding, but there was a sincerity to it that felt right. Jackson stood at the altar with Catherine beside him, and Father Domingo began the ceremony with the traditional words that had bound countless couples together. But even as Jackson spoke his vows, promising to love and cherish and protect, his mind was racing ahead, calculating the dangers that would come. Sutton wouldn't waste time once word reached him. The man had already murdered to get control of Brannan's holdings. He wouldn't hesitate to murder again. When the priest asked for the ring, Jackson felt a moment of panic. He had nothing, no gold band to offer, nothing to symbolize the commitment he was making. But Nanton stepped forward, removing a silver ring from his own hand, a simple band engraved with symbols Jackson recognized as Apache blessings for protection and long life. The chief placed it in Jackson's palm, and their eyes met in silent understanding. "It belonged to my wife," Nanton said quietly. "She wore it for 40 years. She would want it to protect another woman who shows courage." Jackson slipped the ring onto Catherine's finger, feeling the weight of the gesture, the significance of the gift. When the priest pronounced them married and told Jackson he could kiss his bride, he hesitated, uncertain. This was a marriage of necessity, of protection, not romance. But Catherine rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, brief and soft, and in that moment, Jackson felt something shift inside him, some awareness that this was real, binding, irrevocable. They signed the church register, making it official in the eyes of both God and the territorial government, and Father Domingo provided them with a marriage certificate written in his careful hand. Nanton witnessed this document too, and Jackson tucked it carefully into his jacket beside Catherine's father's journal, 2 pieces of paper that now held the power to either save them or condemn them. Outside the church, the warriors had prepared a small meal, and they all ate together in the shade of a cottonwood tree. Catherine managed a few bites of bread and dried meat before exhaustion overtook her, and she dozed against Jackson's shoulder, her breathing shallow and rapid. Jackson felt each breath, hyper-aware of how fragile she was, how easily the fever could take her before Sutton's men ever got the chance. "She is stronger than she looks," Nanton observed, watching them. "To survive what she survived, to hide among the dead for 2 days, requires great strength of spirit. Do not underestimate your wife, Jackson Cordell." "I don't," Jackson said honestly. "But strength of spirit can't fix a damaged heart." What did the medicine woman really say? "The truth, Chief." Nanton was silent for a long moment. "She said Catherine has perhaps 4 moons, maybe 5, before the heart gives out. But she also said that sometimes, when a person finds a reason to live, the body fights longer than seems possible. Your wife has a reason now. She has you to protect her, and she has a mission to complete. These things matter. 4 months, maybe 5. The timeline made Jackson's chest tighten. They had so much to do, so many obstacles to overcome, and the clock was ticking down every moment. "We need to move fast," he said. "The marriage certificate needs to be filed with the territorial registrar, and we need to get Catherine's father's journal to those newspaper editors she mentioned." "Can your warriors carry messages?" "They can," Nanton confirmed. "Where do you need them to go?" They spent the next hour planning in detail. One warrior would ride to Santa Fe with a copy of the marriage certificate, filing it officially and spreading word that Catherine Brennan was now Catherine Cordell, married and under her husband's protection. Another would carry a carefully worded letter to the editor of the Denver Post, a man Cornelius Brennan had helped during a financial crisis years ago. The letter would hint at scandal and corruption in the railroad industry and promise evidence to follow. Jackson would take Catherine to a friend's ranch 50 miles east, a place owned by a former cavalry officer named Thomas Chun, who owed Jackson a life debt from the war years. Chun was tough, reliable, and had no love for corrupt businessmen. His ranch would be defensible, and he had enough men to hold off an attack if it came to that. From there, Jackson could coordinate the release of information from Cornelius Brennan's journal, carefully timing each revelation to maximum effect. It was a risky plan, full of holes and dependent on luck, but it was the best they could manage with limited resources and time. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they prepared to separate, each person carrying a piece of the puzzle that might, if they were fortunate, come together to form Catherine's salvation. Before they left, Father Domingo pulled Jackson aside. "My son, you have taken on a heavy burden. This woman, she is dying, and the men who hunt her are powerful. You understand that by marrying her, you have painted a target on your own back?" "I understand, Father." "Then understand also this. Marriage is sacred, even one born of necessity. In the eyes of God, you are bound to this woman now. Whatever time she has left, whether it is 4 months or 4 years, you owe her more than just protection. You owe her dignity, compassion, perhaps even love if it comes. Do not let the circumstances of your union make you forget that she is human, vulnerable, deserving of tenderness." The words struck deeper than Jackson expected. In all his calculations and planning, he'd thought of Catherine as a problem to solve, a person to protect, but the priest was right. She was his wife now, and that carried responsibilities beyond just keeping her alive. He looked over at where she sat, pale and exhausted, wrapped in blankets despite the heat, and felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. "I'll do right by her, Father," Jackson promised. "Whatever happens." They rode out as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold that seemed like either a blessing or a warning, depending on how a man chose to interpret such things. Catherine rode with Jackson again, and as the miles passed, she began to talk, telling him about her childhood in San Francisco, about her mother who died when she was 12, about her father's obsessive dedication to building his railroad empire. "He wasn't a warm man," Catherine said, her voice drifting in the gathering darkness. "But he was honest in his business dealings, which made him unusual. He believed the railroad could bring civilization and prosperity to the territories, that it could connect people and create opportunities. He didn't just want profit. He wanted to build something that mattered. Sutton didn't share that vision?" Jackson asked. Marcus Sutton wanted money, pure and simple. He saw the railroad as a way to get rich through land speculation and government contracts. He and my father argued constantly about it. The last time I saw them together, my father told Sutton their partnership was over, that he was buying Sutton out. Sutton smiled and agreed, but the smile never reached his eyes. She shivered despite the warm night air. 2 weeks later, my father arranged the trip to inspect the southern route. 2 weeks later, the ambush happened. Did anyone else know about the trip? Just Sutton and my father's secretary, a man named Wilson. Wilson died in the attack too. Jackson filed that information away, another piece of the puzzle. The ambush had been carefully planned, perfectly executed. Sutton had made sure there were no witnesses except Catherine, and she was supposed to have died too. The fact that she'd survived by playing dead among the corpses was either incredible luck or divine intervention, depending on one's beliefs. They reached Chun's ranch just after midnight, guided by the light of a full moon that turned the landscape silver and surreal. The ranch house was a sprawling adobe structure surrounded by corrals and outbuildings, and lights burned in the windows despite the late hour. Thomas Chun himself came out to meet them, a broad-shouldered man with Chinese features and the bearing of a soldier who never quite left the military behind. "Jackson Cordell," Chen said, his voice carrying a mixture of surprise and pleasure. "It's been 3 years. What brings you to my door at midnight with an Apache chief and a lady who looks like she's about to collapse?" "A long story, Tom, and most of it trouble. Can we come in?" Chen's eyes moved between them, reading the situation with the quick assessment of a man used to making life-or-death decisions. "Trouble's always welcome at my table, long as it comes with honest intentions. Get the lady inside before she falls off that horse." Jackson dismounted and helped Catherine down, feeling how light she was, how fragile. Chen's wife, Maria, a Mexican woman with a face as kind as it was beautiful, took one look at Catherine, and immediately took charge, whisking her away to a bedroom with promises of hot water, clean clothes, and medicine. In the ranch house's main room, Jackson explained everything to Chun while Nanton sat silent and watchful. He told about the massacre, about Catherine's survival, about the marriage and the plan to expose Sutton. Chun listened without interrupting, his face growing progressively grimmer as the story unfolded. "Marcus Sutton," Chun said when Jackson finished. "I know that name. He tried to buy up land around here about a year ago, offered prices that were too good to be true. When I refused, he implied there might be accidents, fires, cattle stampedes. I told him to get off my property or I'd shoot him for trespassing. He left, but he didn't forget. Then you know what kind of man we're dealing with. I do, and I know you're going to need more than just a safe place to hide. You're going to need allies, witnesses, people who can't be bought or intimidated." Chun stood and walked to a cabinet, withdrawing a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. "I'm in, Jackson. Whatever you need. Maria and I came west to build something honest, something good. Men like Sutton, they're poison to everything we're trying to create here." They drank to the partnership, and Nanton, declining the whiskey, stood to leave. "My warriors will carry the messages as we discussed. When Sutton comes, and he will come, you send word. The Apache owe no loyalty to corrupt white men. We will help if we can." After Nanton left, Jackson sat alone with Chun, and the exhaustion of the past days finally caught up with him. His body ached, his mind felt stretched thin, and the enormity of what he'd committed to was beginning to settle in his bones. He'd married a dying woman to protect her from murderers, had made enemies of powerful men, and had dragged good people like Chun into danger. "You're wondering if you made the right choice," Chun observed. "Every minute," Jackson admitted. "I felt the same way after the Battle of Shiloh, when I decided to pull you out of that river instead of leaving you for dead. You were just some white soldier, didn't mean anything to me. But something told me to do it anyway, and that choice changed my life. Turned out you were worth saving. Maybe this woman is too." Jackson thought about Catherine, about the determination he'd seen in her eyes even through the pain and exhaustion, about the way she'd spoken of her father's legacy and her desire to make things right. "She is," he said quietly. "I just hope I'm strong enough to see this through." "You will be," Chun said with conviction, "because you're not alone. That's what makes the difference." The dawn came too quickly and brought with it the first signs that Sutton had learned of the marriage. A rider arrived at Chun's ranch before breakfast, a nervous young Mexican who worked as a clerk in the territorial registrar's office in Santa Fe. He'd ridden through the night to deliver a warning. Sutton's men had appeared at the office within hours of the marriage certificate being filed, demanding to know Catherine Brennan's whereabouts and making threats against anyone who'd helped her. "They are offering a reward," the clerk said, his hand shaking as he accepted the coffee Maria offered. $500 for information leading to Catherine Brennan Cordell. They say she is mentally unfit, that she needs to be returned to family care, but everyone knows what they really mean. They want her dead. Jackson felt cold fury settle in his gut. $500 was a fortune in this territory, enough to tempt even honest men into betrayal. Who's leading Sutton's men? A man named Rake Morrison, very dangerous. He has killed many times, always in ways that look like accidents or self-defense. The law cannot touch him because he is clever. Jackson knew the name. Morrison was a hired killer who'd made a reputation during the range wars in Texas, a man who enjoyed his work a little too much. If Sutton had brought Morrison into this, it meant he was serious about eliminating Catherine quickly and permanently. Catherine appeared in the doorway of the bedroom, looking slightly better after a night's rest in Maria's care. She wore a simple dress Maria had provided, and her hair was clean and brushed. But the pallor remained, and Jackson could see the tremor in her hands. "How long do we have?" she asked, her voice steady despite everything. "Days, maybe," Jackson said honestly. Morrison's good at what he does. He'll track us here eventually. Then we need to move faster with the journal. We need to get the evidence public before he finds us. Catherine moved to the table and sat, and Jackson noticed she did it carefully, as if any sudden movement might cause pain. I've been thinking. My father's journal has specific dates, names, records of payoffs to politicians and law enforcement. If we can get copies to multiple newspapers simultaneously, Sutton won't be able to suppress them all. Chun leaned forward. I have contacts in Denver, men who've worked cattle drives with me. They're not newspapermen, but they're honest and they hate corruption. They could deliver documents if needed. What about the territorial governor? Jackson asked. Could we bypass the local authorities, go straight to the top? The clerk shook his head. Governor Thornton, he is Sutton's cousin by marriage. That is how Sutton has so much protection. Catherine's face fell, but only for a moment. Then we go over his head, to Washington. My father had friends in Congress, men who supported the railroad expansion. If we can get the evidence to them, they can call for federal investigations. It was a long shot, but it was something. They spent the morning making copies of the most damaging pages from Cornelius Brennan's journal, Jackson's hand cramping as he carefully reproduced the detailed records of bribes and the planning of the ambush that had killed Catherine's father. Catherine dictated letters to accompany each packet of evidence, personal appeals that carried the weight of a dying woman's last testimony. By afternoon, they had 6 complete packages ready to be delivered to different newspapers, congressmen, and federal marshals. Chun's ranch hands would carry them, spreading out across the territory and beyond, making it impossible for Sutton to intercept them all. It was a good plan, a smart plan, but Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. That feeling proved prophetic when one of Chun's sentries came riding in hard just before sunset, his horse lathered and blowing. Riders coming from the south, he reported. Maybe 8 or 10 men, heavily armed. They're not trying to hide themselves, Morrison, it had to be. The man had found them faster than Jackson had expected, which meant he'd had inside information. Someone who'd betrayed their location for that $500 reward. Jackson felt his hands curl into fists, rage and frustration warring inside him. Get Catherine to the storm cellar, Chun ordered his wife. Take food, water, weapons. Jackson, you and I need to buy them time. But Catherine refused to hide. This is my fight, she insisted. I won't cower in a cellar while men risk their lives for me. You're my wife, Jackson said, surprised by the intensity of his own feeling. That means I decide what risks you take, and hiding is not cowardice, it's survival. Please, Catherine, trust me on this. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, some understanding or connection that went deeper than the practical arrangement they'd made. Catherine nodded slowly and allowed Maria to lead her away, but before she disappeared, she turned back. Don't die for me, Jackson Cordell. I couldn't bear it if you died for me. Chun's ranch had been built with defense in mind, a legacy of his military training and the reality of frontier life. The house itself was thick-walled adobe with small windows perfect for shooting from, and the courtyard could be barricaded quickly. Chun's men, 5 ranch hands who'd all seen combat in various wars and conflicts, took up positions with the calm efficiency of professionals. The riders appeared as the sun touched the horizon, silhouetted against the dying light. There were 9 of them, and they rode with the confidence of men who expected no real resistance. At their head was a tall figure Jackson recognized from wanted posters, Rake Morrison, wearing a long coat despite the heat and sitting his horse like he owned the world. Morrison reined in just outside rifle range and called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. Thomas Chun. We know Catherine Brennan is in there. Send her out, and nobody needs to get hurt. Sutton just wants to ensure she gets proper medical care, that's all. Catherine Cordell, Jackson shouted back, stepping into view. Her name is Catherine Cordell now, and she's under her husband's protection. You've got no business here, Morrison." Morrison's laugh was ugly. "The cowboy who married the dying heiress. Sutton told me about you. Said you were either very brave or very stupid. I'm betting on stupid." He nudged his horse a few steps closer. "Here's how this plays out, Cordell. You give us the woman and whatever papers she's got, and you walk away alive. Maybe we even let you keep some of the money. Or you can try to play hero, and we bury you and everyone in that house. Your choice." "There's a third option," Chun called out. "You turn around and ride away before you find out why they call this the Devil's Ranch." "Devil's Ranch?" Morrison seemed amused. "That's some kind of threat?" "It's a promise. Every man here fought in the war, Morrison. We've seen action at Shiloh, Antietam, Gettysburg. You come through that gate and you'll be riding into hell itself." For a moment, Morrison seemed to consider the threat. Then he shrugged. "Sutton's paying good money. I reckon hell's worth the price." He turned to his men. "Burn them out. Fire arrows, torches, whatever it takes. Nobody leaves that house alive." The attack came swift and brutal. Morrison's men spread out, circling the ranch house and using the approaching darkness for cover. Fire arrows began to arc through the twilight, some embedding in the adobe walls where they burned harmlessly, others landing on the wooden roof of the stable. Within minutes, smoke was billowing into the sky, and Chun's horses were screaming in panic. Jackson fired from a window, his rifle barking and sending one of Morrison's men tumbling from his saddle. Chun's ranch hands were firing too, disciplined and accurate, making every shot count. But Morrison's men were professionals as well, and they kept up a steady barrage of covering fire while others worked to set more buildings ablaze. The battle lasted through the night, a desperate struggle of fire and bullets and shouted curses. Jackson's world narrowed to the mechanical actions of loading and firing, the acrid smell of gunpowder, the screams of wounded horses and wounded men. Somewhere in the chaos, he lost track of time, lost track of everything except the need to hold the line to keep Morrison's men from reaching the house where Catherine hid. As dawn broke, painting the smoke-filled sky in shades of red and orange, Jackson realized they'd held. 5 of Morrison's men were dead or too wounded to fight, and the others had pulled back, retreating to regroup. But the cost had been high. Chun had taken a bullet in the shoulder, and 2 of his ranch hands were dead. The stable was a smoking ruin, and half the outbuildings were destroyed. Morrison sat his horse at the edge of rifle range, his long coat singed and bloody. He stared at the ranch house with an expression that mixed fury and grudging respect. "You've got sand, Chun, I'll give you that. But this isn't over. Sutton wants that woman dead, and what Sutton wants, he gets. I'll be back with more men, and next time I won't be so gentle." He wheeled his horse and rode away, his remaining men following, and Jackson slumped against the wall, exhausted beyond measure. They'd survived the night, but Morrison was right. This wasn't over. It was only beginning. Catherine emerged from the cellar, her face sheet white and her body shaking. She took in the destruction, the bodies of the men who died defending her, and something broke inside her. She fell to her knees, sobbing with a grief so raw it hurt to witness. Jackson went to her, gathered her into his arms, and let her cry against his chest. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry. This is all my fault." "No," Jackson said firmly. "This is Sutton's fault. This is Morrison's fault. This is the fault of every corrupt man who values money more than human life. You didn't ask for any of this, Catherine. You're just trying to survive and do what's right. But people are dying because of me. People are dying because evil men are willing to kill to get what they want. That's not on you." Jackson tilted her face up to look at him. "Your father's journal, the evidence we're sending out, that's going to matter. It's going to expose Sutton and bring him down. These men didn't die for nothing. They died fighting for something that matters." Chun, his shoulder bandaged by Maria, limped over to them. "The packages went out yesterday, before the attack. Morrison doesn't know it, but he's already lost. The evidence is spreading across the territory and beyond. Within a week, every newspaper from here to San Francisco will be running stories about Sutton's crimes. The man's finished. He just doesn't know it yet. Catherine looked up at Chun, hope and sorrow mixing on her face. You've lost so much helping us. Your men, your buildings, maybe your livelihood. How can I ever repay you? You can survive, Chun said simply. You can see this through and make sure your father's legacy means something. That's payment enough. In the days that followed, Jackson watched as the net began to close around Marcus Sutton. Newspapers started running stories about corruption in the railroad industry, about mysterious murders and convenient accidents. Federal marshals began asking questions. Politicians who'd been on Sutton's payroll suddenly found themselves under investigation. The evidence from Cornelius Brennan's journal was doing exactly what Catherine had hoped, exposing the rot at the heart of the territory's business establishment. But even as Sutton's empire crumbled, Catherine's health deteriorated. The stress of the attack, the constant fear, and the relentless progress of the fever were taking their toll. She slept more each day, ate less, and Jackson could see death approaching with the inevitability of a desert sunset. One evening, as they sat together watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Catherine took Jackson's hand. "I want to thank you," she said softly. "Not just for protecting me, but for giving me dignity. You could have treated this marriage as a sham, as nothing but a legal maneuver. But you've been kind to me. You've been a real husband." Jackson felt his throat tighten. Somewhere along the way, without him quite noticing when or how, his feelings toward Catherine had changed. She was no longer just a duty or an obligation. She'd become someone he cared about, someone whose suffering hurt him in ways he didn't quite understand. "You're easy to be kind to," he said, inadequate words for complicated emotions. "When I'm gone," Catherine continued, "everything I have will be yours. The railroad charter, the land grants, all of it. My father's lawyer has the will. I signed it yesterday when he came to visit. You'll be a rich man, Jackson Cordell." "I don't want to be rich," Jackson protested. "I want you to live, but I won't. We both know that. So I want you to promise me something. Promise me you'll use the money to finish what my father started. Build a railroad the right way, the way he envisioned it. Create opportunities for people, connect communities, make the territory a better place. Don't let Sutton's corruption be the last word on the Brennan legacy." Jackson promised, though the words tasted like ashes in his mouth. He didn't want her money or her railroad. He wanted more time, more conversations under the stars, more mornings waking up knowing she was nearby and safe. But time was the one thing he couldn't buy or fight for, the one enemy he couldn't defeat. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a writer who'd pushed his horse hard to reach Chun's ranch. Jackson opened it with Catherine resting against his shoulder in the porch swing, her breathing labored but peaceful. The message was brief and devastating in its implications. Sutton arrested by federal marshals, charged with murder, fraud, conspiracy. Trial set for next month. Morrison killed resisting arrest. You won. Wilson. The name made Jackson's blood run cold for a moment before he remembered. Randall Wilson, Cornelius Brennan's secretary who'd supposedly died in the ambush. But if Wilson had sent this telegram, then he hadn't died. He'd survived somehow, stayed hidden, and now emerged to confirm that Sutton's reign of terror was over. Catherine's eyes were closed, but a faint smile touched her lips. "We did it," she whispered. "It's finally over." "It is," Jackson agreed, pulling her closer. "Sutton will hang for what he did. Justice is coming." But even as he spoke the words, Jackson knew the real truth. They'd won the battle against Sutton, but they were losing the war against Catherine's illness. She was fading day by day, hour by hour, and all his love and protection couldn't stop it. The medicine woman had been right. Perhaps 4 months, she'd said, and 4 months had passed. Catherine was living on borrowed time, each breath a gift that could be revoked without warning. The newspapers confirmed the telegram's information over the following days. The story of Marcus Sutton's arrest dominated headlines across the territory and beyond. Cornelius Brennan's journal had provided prosecutors with enough evidence to charge Sutton and a dozen associates with crimes ranging from bribery to murder. The trial, when it came, was expected to be the most significant in the territory's history. But Catherine wouldn't live to see it. The certainty of that fact hung over Jackson like a storm cloud, darkening everything even as their victory should have been celebrated. Chun and Maria tried to keep spirits up, preparing special meals and inviting friends to visit, but Jackson could see through the forced cheerfulness to the sorrow underneath. They all knew. They were all waiting for the inevitable. It was Maria who suggested the church. "She should marry you properly," she told Jackson one evening when Catherine was sleeping. "Not just with papers and legal contracts, but with the blessing of God and a real ceremony where she can wear a proper dress and have flowers and joy. She deserves that much, Jackson. Every woman deserves a wedding day she can remember with happiness." The idea struck Jackson with the force of revelation. Catherine had married him in haste, in fear, wearing a traveling dress and blankets, with only necessity driving them forward. She'd never had the wedding a woman dreams of, never had the celebration or the beauty or the moment of pure joy. And while he couldn't give her health or a long life, he could give her this one perfect day. Father Domingo agreed to perform the ceremony again, this time with all the dignity and ritual the church could provide. Maria spent days sewing a wedding dress from white silk she'd been saving for her own daughter's future wedding, adding delicate lace and tiny seed pearls that caught the light. Chun's ranch hands built an arch covered in desert wildflowers and sage, and word spread through the scattered communities until it seemed like everyone within 50 miles wanted to attend. The wedding was set for Saturday, and as the day approached, Catherine rallied with a strength that seemed to come from pure determination. Her color improved slightly, her breathing steadied, and she smiled more than Jackson had seen in weeks. She was fighting to stay alive for this one day, marshaling every ounce of will and spirit to experience what they'd missed the first time around. Saturday dawned clear and beautiful, the sky that perfect shade of blue that only exists in the high desert. Catherine dressed in Maria's creation with the help of a dozen women who'd come to assist, and when Jackson saw her walking toward him down the aisle that Chun's men had created with chairs borrowed from every neighbor within riding distance, his breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful, not despite the illness, but somehow because of it, a fragile beauty that spoke to the preciousness of each moment, the value of life itself. The white dress made her skin seem luminous, and the flowers in her hair echoed the wild beauty of the land around them. She walked slowly, steadily, and when she reached Jackson's side and took his hand, he felt tears on his face for the first time since he was a child. Father Domingo performed the ceremony with reverence and joy, speaking of love that transcends circumstances, of commitment that holds firm through trials, of the sacred bond between two souls choosing to walk together through whatever time they're given. When Jackson spoke his vows this time, they came from his heart rather than from duty. "Catherine," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I promise to love you every day we have together, whether that's 50 years or 50 hours. I promise to honor the trust you placed in me and to protect not just your life, but your dignity, your dreams, and your legacy. I promise that you will never face another moment alone or afraid as long as I draw breath. And I promise that when your time comes, whenever that is, you'll go knowing you were loved completely and without reservation." Catherine's vows were simpler but no less powerful. "Jackson, you saved my life in more ways than you know. You gave me hope when I had none, dignity when I felt worthless, and love when I believed I was beyond being loved. I may not have years to give you, but I give you every moment I have left with all my heart." The kiss that sealed their vows was gentle and sweet, and the crowd that had gathered erupted in cheers and applause. For one perfect moment, Death and danger and sorrow seemed far away, replaced by joy and celebration and the simple human need to witness and affirm love in whatever form it takes. The celebration that followed was spontaneous and heartfelt. Someone produced a fiddle, and music filled the air. Tables were laden with food that neighbors had brought, and people danced under the stars as the sun set and lanterns were lit. Catherine danced with Jackson, her steps slow but steady, her face radiant with happiness. She danced with Chun and Father Domingo and every man who asked, accepting each invitation as if it were a precious gift. As the evening wore on, Jackson watched his wife with wonder and growing understanding. Catherine had known, probably from the moment she'd asked him to marry her, that she was dying. But she'd chosen to use her limited time not in despair or surrender, but in fighting for justice, in protecting others, in creating meaning from suffering. She'd transformed what could have been a tragic end into something beautiful and significant. Near midnight, Catherine finally admitted exhaustion and allowed Jackson to carry her to their room. He laid her gently on the bed and sat beside her, holding her hand as she drifted toward sleep. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for the most perfect day of my life." "It was my privilege," Jackson said honestly. "Jackson," Catherine's eyes opened, serious and intent. "I need to tell you something. The medicine woman, she was wrong about the fever. My heart isn't failing because of disease." Jackson felt his own heart stop. "What do you mean?" "I mean that the fever damaged it, yes, but it healed. Slowly, but it healed. I've known for weeks that I was getting stronger, not weaker. The medicine woman examined me again last week and said it was a miracle that I might live for years." She paused, watching his face. "I let everyone keep believing I was dying because I was afraid. Afraid that without the urgency of death, people would abandon the fight against Sutton. Afraid that you would feel released from your obligation to protect me." The revelation hit Jackson like a physical blow. Catherine wasn't dying. She was going to live. All the sorrow and grief he'd been carrying, all the desperate awareness of time running out, had been based on a false premise. He should have felt joy, relief, celebration. Instead, he felt a confusing mixture of anger and hurt and, strangely, a deeper love than he'd known before. "You lied to me," he said quietly. "I did," Catherine admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I lied because I was terrified and desperate and because I didn't know if you'd stay if you knew the truth. And I'm sorry, Jackson. I'm so sorry. If you want to annul the marriage, if you want to walk away, I would understand. I deceived you, and that's unforgivable." Jackson sat in silence for a long moment, processing this new reality. Catherine wasn't the dying heiress he'd married out of pity and duty. She was a woman who would live, who would need a husband not for a few months but for years, decades potentially. Everything had changed, and yet, looking at her tear-stained face, Jackson realized that in the most important way, nothing had changed at all. "I love you," he said, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. "Not because you were dying, not because of obligation or duty. I love you because of who you are, because of your courage and your strength, and the way you fought for what's right even when it cost you everything. I love you because somewhere in the past 4 months, you stopped being a stranger I was protecting and became the most important person in my world." Catherine sobbed, relief and joy and disbelief mixing together. "You don't have to say that. You don't have to stay out of kindness." "I'm not saying it out of kindness," Jackson insisted. "I'm saying it because it's true. You're my wife, Catherine Cordell. Not for 4 months, but for the rest of our lives, however long that is. And I wouldn't want it any other way." He pulled her into his arms, and they held each other as the truth of their situation settled around them like a blessing. The marriage that had begun as a desperate stratagem had become something real, something precious, something worth building a future upon. In the weeks that followed, as Catherine's health continued to improve and the color returned to her cheeks, they began to plan that future together. The railroad charter was theirs to control, and they used it exactly as Catherine's father had envisioned, building lines that connected communities rather than exploiting them, creating jobs and opportunities instead of just profits for distant investors. The trial of Marcus Sutton provided the final piece of closure they needed. Randall Wilson, Cornelius Brennan's secretary who'd survived the ambush by being thrown clear when the stagecoach crashed, testified about Sutton's planning and execution of the attack. Combined with the evidence from Brennan's journal, the testimony was overwhelming. Sutton was convicted on all counts and sentenced to hang. Jackson attended the hanging with Catherine at his side, not out of vengeance but out of a need to witness justice being done. As Sutton stood on the scaffold, his last words were a curse against the Cordels, but Jackson felt no fear. Sutton's power was broken, his empire scattered, his legacy one of corruption and murder rather than success and wealth. Chieftain visited them at the new ranch house they built on land Catherine had inherited from her father. The old Apache looked at them with satisfaction, noting Catherine's healthy color and the way Jackson's hand rested protectively on her shoulder. "You have done well," Nanton said, "both of you. You took something born of necessity and made it into something true and good. We couldn't have done it without you." "Chief," Catherine said warmly, "you saved my life and gave me a chance at justice. I'll never forget that." Nanton smiled, a rare expression that transformed his stern face. "You saved your own life, Catherine Cordell. You had the courage to fight when fighting seemed hopeless, the strength to endure when endurance seemed impossible. I merely provided the opportunity. What you made of it was your own doing." As the years passed, the story of Jackson and Catherine Cordell became legend in the territory. The cowboy who'd married a doomed heiress to save her from assassins. The couple who'd brought down a corrupt empire and used their wealth to build something good and lasting. The marriage that had started as a desperate bargain and became a love story for the ages. They had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and raised them on stories of their grandfather's vision and their parents' courage. The railroad they built connected communities across the territory and later across the state, bringing prosperity and opportunity to thousands of families. And in the town of Standing Rock, where it all began, they built a hospital and a school funded in perpetuity by the Brennan Cordell Trust. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Jackson and Catherine returned to San Miguel, to the small church where Father Domingo had married them twice. The old priest was long dead, but his successor welcomed them warmly and listened to their story with wonder. "You've been blessed," the young priest said, "to find love in such desperate circumstances, to build so much from so little, to turn fear and death into life and hope. That's a rare gift." "It is," Catherine agreed, her hand finding Jackson's with the easy familiarity of decades together. "But it wasn't given to us. We had to fight for it, to choose it every day even when choosing seemed impossible. That's what made it real." That evening, sitting together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Jackson reflected on the path that had brought them here, the terrifying message from Chief Nanton, the desperate marriage, the battles with Sutton's men, the grief and fear and uncertainty, and through it all, the slow growth of something neither of them had expected, love. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked, reading his thoughts with the intuition of long partnership. "Saying yes that night in the mission? Taking on a dying heiress and all her problems?" Jackson pulled her close, breathing in the scent of sage and desert flowers that always clung to her hair. "Not once," he said honestly. "You gave me purpose, Catherine. You gave me a reason to be more than just a drifting cowboy. You gave me a life worth living. We gave each other that," Catherine corrected. "Neither of us could have done it alone." She was right, as she usually was. They'd saved each other in all the ways that mattered. And in doing so, they'd discovered that sometimes the most desperate circumstances could lead to the most beautiful outcomes. That courage could triumph over corruption, And that love could bloom even in the harshest desert if two people were willing to nurture it. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed their first desperate bargain all those years ago, Jackson Cordell held his wife and knew with absolute certainty that he was the richest man in the territory. Not because of the railroad or the land or the money, but because he'd been given the chance to spend his life with someone extraordinary, someone who'd chosen him out of necessity but stayed with him out of love. And in the end, that was the only fortune that truly mattered.